Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving into a brand new study. This is going to be The Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky. We are going to read aloud and discuss as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we begin this exploration. Before we begin, however, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that if you do not know who I am and why I say the things that I do, it is better explained in those. Of particular note today is going to be the Infinite Integrations playlist, where I talk about most of the things that I am hoping is going to be in this study. Now, I talk about magic in a very real way because I have healed myself using magic. I have taken the electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the Holy Spirit, and I have used them to heal myself in my throat and my shoulder. I am healing myself in my back. I am effecting actual positive, measurable change in my life through the things that I talk about. But if you want to do that, then there are things that you need to know. There are rules of engagement, the 8 rules of creation, which guide the fundamentals on how it works. I like to talk a lot about raising levels of responsibility, because once you are aware of something, then you are responsible for that. If you know how to start a fire, you're responsible for fire care, right? If you are aware how to create a poison, you are responsible for how that particular substance will be used. Anything that you have the knowledge of, you are held responsible for. And what I do over here is dispense some knowledge. I cannot guarantee that this particular study will do so, but I am hopeful, right? We did Isis Unveiled, and there was not really a whole lot in that to sink our teeth into esoterically. There was a lot of history, and that's good. But I'm looking for more of the practical side of things, and I'm hoping that the Secret Doctrine is what's going to do that. But because of that, you will be held responsible for several things that I talk about, right? If I relay information to you and you assimilate that information, you are now responsible for it. The best way to ensure that you are using that information responsibly and that you get the intended effects is to go back through the Infinite Integrations playlist. It is there as a resource so that you have a better understanding of the fundamentals of how this works. I am greatly hoping that this process is going to give more opportunity to explain in fuller detail the things that we have already talked about in some detail already. But with that being said, if you are wanting to practice magic, understand that you probably do not have a understanding already. If you're running around calling yourself a witch these days, you're probably not correct. And I don't say that to step on your toes, right? I am here to show you how to do it in a way that is effective. If you're casting incantations and making little bundles to curse people, you are doing things absolutely wrong. You are absolutely doing it the wrong way, and you need to be aware of that. If you are calling yourself learned in these matters, if you are instructing other people in these matters, you should pay attention to what you are doing, because you are held to a level of responsibility above theirs. So if you are instructing people, the Infinite Integrations playlist is going to be good for you as well. The fundamentals on how this works is extremely important. Also, this book is formatted differently than most of the other ones that we have done. The footnotes are attached to each page instead of at the end of the chapter, so we may wind up going into some of the footnotes just because it is easy to go back and forth. That means it may be a little bit more prolonged, a little bit more long-winded than you may like, and that is fine. You don't have to stick around. We are only here for those who actually want some true knowledge. So with all of that being said, we are going to dive in and begin our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with It's the introduction, the preface and the introduction. Let's go. Also, just so you're aware, straight off from the top, so that if my voice does a little bit of its modulation thing, this is in part vocal therapy for me. 1 year ago, I was unable to talk. I have healed myself with the will of God through the Holy Spirit, which is the electromagnetic forces of creation. But I still am working on getting my vocal acuity where it needs to be. My voice will modulate as we go along. I will be drinking my tea, which helps with the chest congestion that is really holding me back from what I'm doing. If any of that is a problem for you, this is not going to be the study for you as well. All right, now, This is the preface. This work I dedicate to all true theosophists in every country and of every race, for they called it forth, and for them it was recorded. The preface. The author, the writer rather, feels it necessary to apologize for the long delay which has occurred in the appearance of this work. It has been occasioned by ill health and the magnitude of the undertaking. Even the 2 volumes now issued do not complete the scheme, and these do not treat exhaustively of the subjects dealt with in them. A large quantity of material has already been prepared dealing with the history of occultism and contained in the lives of the great adepts of the Aryan race, and showing the bearing of occult philosophy upon the conduct of life as it is and as it ought to be. All right, we're going to pause right here and deal with something that is going to set off a lot of people, right? This book was written in 1888. That was well before the Nazis. And so I want you to understand fully and completely that this phrase right here, the adepts of the Aryan race, is not talking about white people from Europe. It is talking about people from the Punjab region of India. If you were unfamiliar, that is her understanding of it. See the very last video that I did in Isis Unveiled. She talked about this quite explicitly, right? She does not mean that white people are superior to anyone. The Aryans came from India. That is literally her understanding of the history. So when she mentions the Aryans, it is not Germans that she is talking about. She is not associated with Nazism at all because it did not exist as of yet. Communism was poking its head out. Fascism's always been a thing, but it was becoming defined at this point. Socialism also becoming defined at this point. This was just around the time of the revolution in Russia, which enacted communism. It was prior to World War I, much less World War II. And so most of your arguments about racism, while it is absolutely certain that in this period of time they had some not great modes of thought, right? They considered other people lesser than themselves because of the level of melanin in their skin. I do not hold those views, but if I see a word in here, I'm going to say the word as it is written. It is not meant with an intent or malice. Just so you know, I don't care how much melanin you have. To me, that is one of the least important things about you. How you think, how you act, those are very important to me. What level of melanin you have or what texture your hair has doesn't. What you choose to do with your genitals, again, has no bearing upon me whatsoever. So anything that is slightly offensive in this work, you can get mad about it. I don't care. But I want to make sure that you understand. She is not talking about white people when she mentions Aryan, right? She is talking about people from India, and as far as I know, most of those are pretty dark. All right. Should the present volumes meet with a favorable reception, no effort will be spared to carry out the scheme of the work in its entirety. The 3rd volume is entirely ready, and the 4th almost so. I don't know that we got 4 volumes. I think there is only 2 in here. I am not sure. I didn't read through this. We're doing this together. This scheme, it must be added, was not in contemplation when the preparation of the work was first announced. As originally announced, it was intended that the Secret Doctrine should be an amended and enlarged version of Isis Unveiled. I really hope not. It was, however, soon found that the explanations could be added to those already put before the world in the last named and other works dealing with the esoteric science. Words such as require a different method of treatment. And, consequently, the present volumes do not contain, in all, 20 pages extracted from Isis Unveiled. Like, we spent a lot of time in Isis Unveiled. There was a lot of history in Isis Unveiled. There was a lot of things to learn, but not necessarily things that we need to repeat, right? Most of them were arguments for theosophy even existing, that the underpinnings of theosophy were pulled from these older religions, and it was more of a we source this from there type of thing. It was an argument for various things and against various other things, but none of it was directly related to the practical application of magic, which is where I'm looking for. All right. It was, however, soon. Okay. The author does not feel it necessary to ask the indulgence of her readers and critics for the many defects of literary style and the imperfect English which may be found in these pages. She is a foreigner, and her knowledge of the language was acquired late in life. The English tongue is employed because it offers the most widely diffused medium for conveying the truths which it had become her duty to place before the world. That is something that I feel, right? I feel that it is my duty to shed light on the things that are, like we've done several works already in the Infinite Integrations playlist and the Esoterica playlist, where we talk about what they talk about and whether it is something that is practical or not, something that I have experience with or not. And so I'm doing much the same thing here, right? English is my first language, however, and so hopefully I can be a little bit more clear. Right, I have a greater understanding than most people. I am an adept in at least the practical application of magic. I don't claim to be some master, but I am on my way to learning enough to one day be classified as such. I have effected practical change in my life in a physical way that is measurable and trackable. If you're unfamiliar with any of that, you can check out my story. It is freely available. This channel is open for everyone, but it is not for everyone. Some people will find the things that I talk about too offensive. They will say, I don't know what I'm talking about, that I am not an authority on these things. They will tell you that, well, somebody else said this for 5,000 years, so it must be true. And I do not hold to that. It is either true or it's not. It does not matter how many people have told you that it's true. If it is false, I will say it's false. That is too much for some people. And again, if that is you, this isn't the study for you. This is for people seeking the higher truth, the higher knowledge, and the practical application, and I am perfectly fine with you not being here if that is not you. I do not do this to step on toes, but I will almost certainly step on your toes along the way. And it is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. You will hear that again. These truths are in no sense put forth as a revelation. I do. Now, this is a differentiation between me and her. I have had things directly revealed to me. You go through the Infinite Integrations playlist for greater explanations of those. But I have had divine experiences. Those divine experiences are what led me to both heal myself and to help to instruct other people in how to do the same thing. So I do believe in divine revelation. If you do not, again, this may not be the study for you. Nor does the author claim the position of a revealer of mystic lore. And again, I am doing that. I am revealing mystic lore. As of yet, no Great White Brotherhood has showed up to try and shut me up, despite the fact that I am revealing secrets. Now made public for the first time in the world's history. For what is contained in this work is to be found scattered throughout thousands of volumes embodying the scriptures of the great Asiatic and early European religions, hidden under glyph and symbol, and hitherto left unnoticed because of this veil. What is now attempted is to gather the oldest tenets together and to make of them one harmonious and unbroken whole. The sole advantage which the writer has over her predecessors is that she needs not resort to personal speculations and theories. For this work is a partial statement of what she herself has been taught by more advanced students, supplemented, in a few details only, by the results of her own study and observation. The publication of many of the facts herein stated have been rendered necessary by the wild and fanciful speculations in which many theosophists and students of mysticism have indulged. Yes! During the last few years, in their endeavor to, as they imagined, work out a complete system of thought from the few facts previously communicated to them. If you are using the Necromonicon, you are probably doing it wrong. That has been revealed, but it is not a true thing. There are a lot of things along that nature. If you are casting higher magic, I'm not going to say that it is completely wrong because I don't have experience with any of those entities. I have not attempted to call in no angels or demons. So it is possible that you can do those things, but everything that I do is without any entity interference. It is a direct relationship with the creator of all things and the manipulation of the electromagnetic forces of creation through the use of the soul by the way of the 5D temple that we navigate around in. And so I have different thoughts, right? Sometimes people have put things out there that will work in, like, the thing with the Necromonicon is like this tool right here. This is a tool. This is a stone. You can see it. It's turquoise. It's third eye. I use that tool, but that tool does nothing by itself. If I just sit it there, it does absolutely nothing. But I can imbue my energy into this and give it a very limited scope of powers. My belief in it is part of that, but I believe that there are external reverberations that come from the stone itself. But it is a tool. It does absolutely nothing without you to guide it. The various sigils and incantations that are associated with magic, for the most part, have the exact same thing. They are only effective in the fact that you place them, the energy investment into them. They can do nothing by themselves. If there is a pentagram drawn upon the ground, it does nothing. Absolutely nothing by itself. Your energetic investment is what allows that to happen. That is what most of the problem with higher magic is. If you are dealing with those type of things, you're probably not aligned correctly. You are probably not intentionally correct. You are probably not even doing the incantations in the correct way. And all three of those factors are dangerous. So you should be extremely careful when using any of the tools, right? Even something so simple as a clearing stone, something so simple as focus and grounding stones, something that simple, you should be ensuring that you are placing the correct intentionality into, because those things can reverberate on you, whether you believe that or not, whether it is inside of your conception boxes or not. You can affect these things. It is needless to explain that this book is not the secret doctrine in its entirety, but a select number of fragments of its fundamental tenets. Special attention being paid to some facts which have been seized upon by various writers and distorted out of all resemblance of the truth. And again, that is what I am here to do. I, however, do want to give you the entirety of it, right? My problem is the organizational part of it, right? To keep it straight and to make sure that it is consistent. That's why we do these studies, so that I have a launching off point to ensure that I keep it in order and that I talk about all of the things necessary. I have a tendency to forget details. It is part of my stack. If you're unfamiliar with what that is, infinite integration will definitely help you with that. And that, to me, is an intricate part of understanding and manipulating these forces. Understanding how your mind works and where your particular picadillos are. But I am trying to make sure that the correct information is out there in the fullness of which it is possible. To the greatest extent of revealing, I hold no oaths that are binding me from revealing any truth. The only club I am a part of, I feel like I'm probably the only one, right? I don't want to say I am the only one because I don't know. But I have been initiated spiritually into the order of Melchizedek. That is too much for some people, and if that's you, again, this is not the study for you. It does not give me any special privileges. It seems to be a requirement that I dispense this truth and this knowledge. I have been given the ability to manipulate these things. It is probably part of the process, but I don't know that. But that is the only order that I am a member of. It is the order of Melchizedek. It was a spiritual initiation. It is not something that I can convey upon anyone else. I cannot take you and make you part of the club, right? There is an identifier that is readily available for anyone else who is part of the club, and if you try to lie about it, you will get caught. But other than that, as far as I know, I'm the only one, but I doubt very seriously I'm the only one. I don't hold any allegiance to these clubs, right? I'm not a Mason. I'm not part of any of those little cliques and groups. The things that I know, I have learned through reading what is readily available and direct revelation from the source itself. As a matter of fact, most of the things that I have read haven't benefited me that much. The things that were directly revealed to me that I convey quite often have. I have affected change in my life through the things that I am relaying to you, and I am trying to give you the ability to do the same thing as freely, openly, and honestly as I can. You can take whatever I say at face value and dismiss it, or you can investigate and learn something. That is entirely up to you. But I am here to clarify some facts which have been seized upon by various writers and distorted out of all resemblance to the truth. But it is, perhaps, desirable to state unequivocally that the teachings, however fragmentary and incomplete, contained in these volumes belong neither to the Hindu, the Zoroastrian, the Chaldean, nor the Egyptian religion. Neither to Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, nor Christianity exclusively. The secret doctrine is the essence of all of these, sprung from it in their origins. The various religious schemes are now made to merge back into their original element, out of which every mystery and dogma has grown, developed, and become materialized. It is more than probable that the book will be regarded by a large section of the public as a romance of the wildest kind. For who has ever even heard of the Book of Dizan? I haven't. I want to, though. Remind me to look that one up, please. The writer, therefore, is fully prepared to take all the responsibility for what is contained in this work, and even to face the charge of having invented the whole of it. That it has many shortcomings, she is fully aware. All that she claims for it is that, romantic as it may seem to many, its logical coherence and consistency entitle this new Genesis to rank, at any rate, on a level with the working hypotheses so freely accepted by modern science. Further, it claims consideration not by reason of any appeal to dogmatic authority, but because it closely adheres to nature and follows the laws of uniformity and analogy. The aim of this work may thus be stated, to show that nature is not a fortuitous concurrence of atoms. I try to break up the quotations with a different voice. Again, if that's too much for you, I'm sorry. It's just trying to make it a little bit entertaining. I explain all of this in the preface ones and the introductory ones so that I don't have to do that as we're going forward. I will refer you back to this video. And to assign to man his rightful place in the scheme of all the universe, to rescue from degradation the archaic truths which are the basis of all religions, and to uncover, to some extent, the fundamental unity from which they all spring. Finally, to show that the occult side of nature has never been approached by the science of modern civilization. If this is in any degree accomplished, the writer is content. It is written in the service of humanity, and by humanity and the future generations it must be judged. Its author recognizes no inferior court of appeal. Abuse she is accustomed to, calumny she is daily acquainted with, at slander she smiles in silent contempt. De minimis non curat lex. And this also goes for me. It is my intention to give you freely, honestly, and openly the best information that I possibly can. It is entirely possible that I am wrong in some things, but most of the things that I discuss as though I know, it is because I have done so, right? If I tell you that you can manipulate the forces of creation, it is because I have done so. If I tell you that you can heal an ailment or an injury, it is because I have done so. That does not mean that it is a guarantee to do so, right? I still have issues. I still have problems, even though I am in the process of being healed. That is going to be too much for people too, and some people will come and they will try to heap abuse. Understand fully and completely, I am not here for that, right? I will correct in the comments one time and then I will probably just let it go. I'm not going to spend my day trying to disabuse people who are determined that they are correct, even though they don't have the factual information behind them to support that. I want to make it also abundantly clear. One of these videos that is linked up here, or playlist that is linked up here, is the Unconventional Bible Study. It is 161 videos where I read the Bible aloud in much the same way that we are doing here. And it is through that Bible study, through reading through the Old Testament and most, well, I wouldn't say most, but the irrelevant parts of the New, that I left the religion that is Christianity. I fully believe that those control systems, whether it is Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism even, are meant to control the things that we talk about. Now, Buddhism is a little bit different because it is a lot more lax in the practical application of things. But there are things that I absolutely disagree with in Buddhism, right? Not eating meat being one of them. Not having sex being another one, right? If anybody is telling you to be completely chaste, they are giving you wrong information. You are not meant to never have sex. You are not meant to never have a house. You are not meant to not have wealth. You are not meant to be in desperation. That is not what is meant for you. There are exceptions to that, right? Some people are called to poverty. Some people are called to chastity, but it is an exceedingly small amount of people. It is not meant for everyone to not partake of things. There are 7 virtues, 7 vices. You are meant to walk the middle of those. So, chastity and lust, you're meant to have sex, but you're not meant to have sex with everyone. You're meant to find your partner and have sexual relations with them. Poverty and greed, right? You are meant to have things. You're not meant to get rid of everything and live in poverty, nor are you meant to idle materialism and have everything. You are meant to be comfortable, but not excessively indulgent. You are meant to find the balance. It is up to you to find the balance. It is not up to me to strike the balance in your life. It is not up to me to make decisions about your life. Some people are inclined towards polygamy. It will work for an exceedingly small amount of people. The chances of you finding someone else who is also inclined towards that is exceedingly small, much less the 3 of you getting together. And so for the most part, polygamy doesn't work, but some people are built that way. I am not here to judge you if you have more than one partner. I am here to tell you that for most people, that is not the way to go. I try to be clear and differentiate between the things that I know and the things that I guess, the things that I suppose, the things that I speculate upon. If I am being speculative, I try to be clear about that. That does not always happen, but it is fairly common that I do catch myself and be like, I am speculating about this. This is in my conspiratorial mind, is a phrase that I use a lot. If I'm giving you information and I am firm upon it, it is because I have done it. Not because I have read it, but because I have put it into practice myself. I want to be very clear as we go into this introduction, because some people don't get past introductions. Some people will not go back and watch the playlist because it is long and there's a lot in there, and I understand that. I cannot assume that you have watched every video, but as we go along through this study, I will point you back to this video so that you can get a better understanding. I will always point out these various playlists that are linked above so that you can get a better understanding of why I say the things I do, because the story is in full in those playlists. All right, next up, introduction. Gently to hear, kindly to judge. Shakespeare. Since the appearance of theosophical literature in England, it has become customary to call its teachings esoteric Buddhism, and, having become a habit, as an old proverb based on daily experience has it, error runs down an inclined plane while truth has to laboriously climb its way uphill. That is something that I say a lot too, right? I believe that we live on a spiral of choice. Now, that's a little bit much for some people, so let me tell you what I mean. You were born neutral, right in the middle. Picture it as a giant screw. At the top is perfect good works. At the bottom is perfect evil works, right? And you're born in the middle, and you have to make a decision. Are you going to walk up that spiral of choice towards the greater good, or are you going to walk down with complacency or intentionality towards the greater detriment? That is a choice that every single person has. It is something that you have to decide for yourself. I cannot push upon you, but the fundamentals of it is harder to walk up the hill. You have to make the decision to walk up the hill. And if you do not decide to walk up the hill, you are making the decision to go down, because entropy exists and there is no staying still on the inclined plane. You are either walking up it with intention, or you are walking down it either with intention or complacency. But either way, you are moving through the spiral of choice. My goal is to help as many people to be equipped as possible to walk up the spiral of choice. It's not even that hard. The burden is light. The yoke is easy. It is not a difficult path if your mindset is correct, right? It is for your betterment. It is not for your detriment that you are restricted from things. There's nothing wrong with drinking every once in a while. There is something wrong with drinking every day. There's nothing wrong with having sex with your partner. There is something wrong with having sex with everyone you see. You have to make the intentional choices about where your life wants to go. That is a fundamental part of what I teach over here. And so you will hear me talk about the spiral of choice often. You will hear me talk about taking control of your timeline, because that is pretty much the same thing. I believe that we are all on the same, strike that. We are all on our own individualized timelines, right? My decisions affect my life, and to a small part, the lives of people around me, but they are on their own timelines, and they can freely leave my timeline at any point. If we are together, then we are going to the same goal, but that doesn't mean that it will be always. Does not mean that we will always agree. You get to make free choice. You get to make decisions about your life. You get to decide whether you want to go in the same direction as me or not. But I have taken control of my timeline. That is something, again, we talk about in the Infinite Integrations playlist. The NPC and the multiverse, specifically the video for that, I've taken control of my timeline, and there's a good chance that I've taken control of yours too. If you have not taken direct control of your timeline, I have assumed responsibility for that. That is a little bit heady, but it is a truth. Most people have not taken control of their timelines, and because of that, other people attempted to. There are nefarious players out there. I believe in the entities. There are entities that are aligned for your betterment, and there are entities that are aligned for your detriment. And some people out there listen to the entities that are aligned for your detriment. They have taken control of the idle timelines up until I assumed responsibility for them. I assumed responsibility for my timeline well before I did anyone else's, but I have taken up responsibility for the idle timelines. If you are not actively against what I teach and against what I do, then I have taken control of the greater timeline, right? Most of what is going to happen is going to be for the betterment. It is just part of the way that the energy works. My dedication and my commitment to it is greater than theirs. My wanting the best for you supersedes their wanting the worst for you. That is the way that it works according to the law of returns. And because of that, I have decided to take the responsibility. But you can take it back at any point. I am not taking anybody's will away. I am not enforcing in any way, shape, or form. If you decide that you do not want to be on the timeline with me, you can take control of your timeline and you can move off in a different direction. We do not have to have the same result. That is, again, a concept that is a little bit hard for people, but the NPC and the multiverse will get you there. Back to the text. This is going to be long. Y'all get in. Old truisms are often the wisest. The human mind can hardly remain entirely free from bias, and decisive opinions are often formed before there is a thorough examination of a subject from all its aspects has been made. This is said with reference to the prevailing double mistake of limiting theosophy to Buddhism and of confounding the tenets of religious philosophy preached by Gautama the Buddha with the doctrines broadly outlined in esoteric Buddhism. Anything more erroneous than this could hardly be imagined. It has enabled our enemies to find an effective weapon against theosophy because, as an eminent Pali scholar very poignantly expressed it, there was in the volume named Neither Esotericism nor Buddhism, the esoteric truth presented in Mr. Sennett's work had ceased to be esoteric from the moment they were made public, nor did it contain the religion of Buddha, but simply a few more tenets from a hitherto hidden teaching, which are now supplemented by many more, enlarged and explained in the present volumes. But even the latter, though giving out many fundamental tenets from the secret doctrine of the East, raised but a small corner of the dark veil, for no one, not even the greatest living adept, would be permitted to, or could, even if he would, give out promiscuously to a mocking, unbelieving world that which has been so effectually concealed from it for long eons and ages. Wrong. 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 Guess what? I am doing that. Again, that sounds awful heady. Sorry. That sounds awful heady, and I understand that. It is something that I am doing, however. I am raising that veil. I am showing to everyone, yes, you can make magic happen. You can move the electromagnetic forces of creation through your stack and even out. You can do things that other people have considered to be false, that they lie about, they would burn you at the stake for. You can do those things. I am raising the veil, and I have not been stopped. I mentioned before, there has been no great white brotherhood that showed up to stop me. I have revealed secrets already, right? And maybe they just haven't found me. Maybe they'll show up today. They don't want to. That's not a physical threat. I am protected. You don't have to believe that again. That is something that is simply true. You cannot cast a curse on me. You cannot stop me from what I am doing. This is directly from source. Creator has told me to do this. It is time for the walls to come down. It is time for falling away, and we are doing so. Esoteric Buddhism was an excellent work with a very unfortunate title, though it meant no more than does the title of this work, The Secret Doctrine. It proved unfortunate because people are always in the habit of judging things by their appearance rather than their meaning, and because the error has now become so universal that even most of the fellows of the Theosophical Society have fallen victims to the same misconception. From the first, however, protests were raised by Brahmins and others against the title, and in justice to myself I must add that Esoteric Buddhism was presented to me as a completed volume, and that I was entirely unaware of the manner in which the author intended to spell the word Buddhism. Does that make a difference? Like, if you're arguing over the spelling of the word in this setting, does it really make a difference? This has to be laid directly at the door of those who, having been the first to bring the subject under public notice, neglected to point out the difference between Buddhism, the religious system of ethics preached by Lord Gautama and named after his title of Buddha, the enlightened, and Buddha, wisdom or knowledge, vidya, the faculty of cognizing from the Sanskrit root bud, to know. We Theosophists of India are ourselves the real culprits, although at the time we did our best to correct the mistake. See Theosophist, June 1883. To avoid this deplorable misnomer was easy. The spelling of the word had only to be altered, and by common consent both pronounced and written Buddhism instead of Buddhism. Nor is the later term correctly spelt and pronounced, as it ought to be called in English, Buddhaism, and its votaries Buddhists. This explanation is absolutely necessary at the beginning of a work like this one. The wisdom religion is the inheritance of all the nations the world over, that the statement was made in esoteric, though the statement was made in esoteric Buddhism. Preface to the original edition, that 2 years ago, in example 1883, neither I nor any other European living knew the alphabet of the science here for the first time put into a scientific shape, etc. This error must have crept in through inadvertence, for the present writer knew all that which is divulged in esoteric Buddhism, and much more, many years before it became her duty, in 1880, to impart a small portion of the secret doctrine to 2 European gentlemen, one of whom was the author of Esoteric Buddhism. And surely the present writer has the undoubted, though to her rather equivocal, privilege of being a European by birth and education. Moreover, a considerable part of the philosophy expounded by Mr. Sennett was taught in America, even before Isis Unveiled was published. The two Europeans, and to my colleague, Colonel H.S. Alcott. Of the three teachers the latter gentleman has had, the first was a Hungarian initiate, the second an Egyptian, the third a Hindu. As permitted, Colonel Alcott has given out some of this teaching in various ways. If the other two have not, it has been simply because they were not allowed, their time for public work having not yet come. But for others it has, and the appearance of Mr. Sennett's several interesting books is a visible proof of the fact. It is, above everything, important to keep in mind that no theosophical book acquires the least additional value from pretended authority. In etymology, Adi and Adhi Buddha, the one or the first, and supreme wisdom is a term used by Arya Sangha in his secret treatises, and now by all the mystic northern Buddhists. It is a Sanskrit term and an appellation given by the earliest Aryans to the unknown deity. The word Brahma, not being found in the Vedas and the early works, it means the absolute wisdom, and Adibhuta is translated the primeval uncreated cause of all by Fitz-Edward Hall. Eons of untold duration must have elapsed before the epithet of Buddha was so humanized, so to speak, as to allow the term being applied to mortals, and finally appropriated to one whose unparalleled virtues and knowledge caused him to receive the title of the Buddha of wisdom unmoved. Bodha means the innate possession of divine intellect or understanding. Buddha, the acquirement of it by personal efforts and merit, while Bodhi is the faculty of cognizing the channel through which divine knowledge reaches the ego, the discernment of good and evil, divine conscience also, and spiritual soul, which is the vehicle of Atma. When Bodhi absorbs our egotism, destroys it, with all its vikaras, Avalokiteshvara becomes manifested to us, and nirvana or mukti is reached. Mukti being the same as nirvana. In example, freedom from the trammels of maya or illusion. Bodhi is likewise the name of a particular state of trance condition called samadhi, during which the subject reaches the culmination of spiritual knowledge. Unwise are those who, in their blind and, in our age, untimely hatred of Buddhism, and by reaction of Buddhism, deny its esoteric teachings, which are those also of the Brahmins, simply because the name suggests what to them, as monotheists, are noxious doctrines. Unwise is the correct term to use in their case. For the esoteric philosophy is alone calculated to withstand, in this age of crass and illogical materialism, the repeated acts on all and everything man holds most dear and sacred in his inner spiritual life. The true philosopher, the student of the esoteric wisdom, entirely loses sight of personalities, dogmatic beliefs, and special religions. Moreover, esoteric philosophy reconciles all religions, strips every one of its outward human garments, and shows the root of each to be identical with that of every other great religion. It proves the necessity of an absolute divine principle in nature. It denies deity no more than it does the sun. Esoteric philosophy has never rejected God in nature, nor deity, as the absolute and abstract ens. It only refuses to accept any of the gods of these so-called monotheistic religions, gods created by man in his own image and likeness. A blasphemous and sorry caricature of the ever unknowing. Agreed. Furthermore, the records we mean to place before the reader embrace the esoteric tenets of the whole world since the beginning of our humanity, and Buddhistic occultism occupies therein only its legitimate place and no more. Indeed, the secret portions of the Dan or Yana, we're going to check out the footnote here, that is, Dan, now becomes in modern Chinese and Tibetan phonetics, Chahan, is the general term for the esoteric schools and their literature. In the old books, the word Yana is referred to as to reform oneself by meditation and knowledge, a second inner birth, hence Dajan, phonetically, the book of Daizan. And yes, there is no, in what I teach, there is no die and be born again, right? There is, however, to sacrifice your life of vice or exclusivity of the virtues to source, right? I have sacrificed my vices to God. That is the only requirement for forgiveness. There is no need to kill anything in order for you to be forgiven from sin. There was never any need to sacrifice an animal or a person for you to be forgiven from your sins. The only thing that was necessary for forgiveness is to ask for forgiveness, to go to the Creator and be like, hey, I messed up. I am genuinely remorseful and I want to change my ways. That is all that has ever been required. There has never been a blood sacrifice required, and every single time that a blood sacrifice has been required, it has been to the wrong entity. The secret portions of the Dan, or Yana, of Gautama's metaphysics, grand as they appear to one unacquainted with the tenets of the wisdom religion of antiquity, are but a very small portion of the whole. The Hindu reformer limited his public teachings to the purely moral and physiological aspect of the wisdom religion, to ethics and man alone, things unseen and incorporeal, the mystery of being outside our terrestrial sphere. The great teacher left entirely untouched in his public lectures, reserving the hidden truth for a select circle of his arhats. The latter received their initiation at the famous Saptaparna cave, the Satapani of Mahavansa, near Mount Baibahar, the Webhara of the Pali manuscript. This cave was in Rajagriha, the ancient capital of Maghara, and was the Keta cave of Hyen, as rightly suspected by some archaeologists. Mr. Belgore, the chief engineer at Bodh Gaya, and a distinguished archaeologist, was the first, we believe, to discover it. Time and human imagination made short work of the purity and philosophy of these teachings once that they were transplanted from the secret and sacred circle of our Arhats during the course of their work of proselytism into a soil less prepared for metaphysical conceptions than India. An example, once they were transferred into China, Japan, Siam, and Burma. How the pristine purity of these grand revelations was dealt with may be seen in studying some of these so-called esoteric Buddhist schools of antiquity in their modern garb, not only in China and other Buddhist countries in general, but even in not a few schools in Tibet, left to the care of uninitiated lamas and Mongolian innovators. Thus, the reader is asked to bear in mind the very important difference between Orthodox Buddhism, an example, the public teachings of Gautama the Buddha, and his esoteric Buddhism, his esoteric Buddhism. His secret doctrine, however, differed in no wise from that of the initiated Brahmins of his day. The Buddha was a child of the Aryan soil, a born Hindu, a Kshatriya, and a disciple of the twice-born, the initiated Brahmins, or Dvijas. I am terrible with these words. I try my best, but it is not going to be exactly, just so you know. His teachings, therefore, could not be different from their doctrines, for the whole Buddhist reform merely consisted in giving out a portion of that which had been kept secret from every man outside of the enchanted circle of temple initiates and ascetics. Unable to teach all that had been imparted to him, owing to his pledges, though he taught a philosophy built upon the groundwork of the true esoteric knowledge, the Buddha gave to the world only its outward material body and kept its soul for his elect. See also Volume 2. Many Chinese scholars among Orientalists have heard the soul doctrine. None seem to have understood its real meaning and importance. That doctrine was preserved, secretly, too secretly perhaps, within the sanctuary. The mystery that shrouded its chief dogma and aspirations, nirvana, has so tried and irritated the curiosity of those scholars who have studied it that, unable to solve it logically and satisfactorily, by untying the Gordian knot, they cut it through by declaring that nirvana meant absolute annihilation. Towards the end of the first quarter of this century, a distinct class of literature appeared in the world, which became with every year more defined in its tendency. Being based, soi-disant, on the scholarly researches of Sanskritists and Orientalists in general, it was held scientific. Hindu, Egyptian, and other ancient religions, myths, and emblems were made to yield anything the symbologists wanted them to yield, thus often giving out the rude outward form in place of the inner meaning. Works most remarkable for their ingenious deductions and speculations, in circulo vicio, foregone conclusions generally changing places with premises, in the syllogisms of more than one Sanskrit and Pali scholar, appeared rapidly in succession, overflooding the libraries with dissertations rather on phallic and sexual worship than on real symbology, and each contradicting the other. This is the true reason, perhaps, why the outline of a few fundamental truths from the secret doctrine of the archaic ages is now permitted to see the light after long millenniums of the most profound silence and secrecy. I say a few truths advisedly, because that which must remain unsaid could not be contained in 100 such volumes, nor could it be imparted to the present generation of Sadducees. But even that little that is now given is better than complete silence upon these vital truths. The world of today, in its mad career towards the unknown, which it is too ready to confound with the unknowable, whenever the problem eludes the grasp of the physicist, is rapidly progressing on the reverse material plane of spirituality. It has now become a vast arena, a true valley of discord and eternal strife, a necropolis wherein lie buried the highest and most holy aspirations of our spirit soul. That soul becomes with every new generation more paralyzed and atrophied. The amiable infidels and accomplished profligates of society, spoken of by Greeley, care little for the revival of the dead sciences of the past, but there is a fair minority of earnest students who are entitled to learn the few truths that may be given to them now, and now much more than 10 years ago when Isis Unveiled, or even the later attempts to explain the mysteries of esoteric science, were published. One of the greatest, and, withal, the most serious objection to the correctness and reliability of the whole work will be the preliminary stanzas. How can the statements contained in them be verified? True, if a great portion of the Sanskrit, Chinese, and Mongolian works quoted in the present volumes are known to some Orientalists, the chief work, that one from which the stanzas are given, is not in the possession of European libraries. The book of Dazan, or Dazan, is utterly unknown to our philologists, or at any rate, was never heard of by them under its present name. This is, of course, a great drawback to those who follow the methods of research prescribed in official science, but to the students of occultism, and to every genuine occultist, this will be of little moment. The main body of the doctrines given is found scattered throughout hundreds and thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts, some already translated, disfigured in their interpretations, as usual, others still awaiting their turn. Every scholar, therefore, has an opportunity of verifying the statements herein made and of checking most of the quotations. A few new facts, new to the profane Orientalist only, and passages quoted from the commentaries will be found difficult to trace. Several of the teachings also have hitherto been transmitted orally, yet even these are in every instance hinted at in almost countless volumes of Brahmanical Chinese and Tibetan temple literature. However it may be, and whatever is in store for the writer through malevolent criticism, one fact is certain. The members of several esoteric schools, the seat of which is beyond the Himalayas, and whose ramifications may be found in China, Japan, India, Tibet, and even in Syria, besides South America, claim to have in their possession the sum total of sacred and philosophical works in manuscript and type. All the works, in fact, that have ever been written, in whatever language or characters, since the art of writing began, from the ideographic hieroglyphs down to the alphabet of Cadmus and the Devanagari. It has been claimed in all ages that ever since the destruction of the Alexandrian Library, see Isis Unveiled, we've done that work, every work of a character that might have led to the profane to the ultimate discovery and comprehension of some of the mysteries of the secret science was, owing to the combined efforts of the members of those brotherhoods, diligently searched for. It is added, moreover, by those who know that once found, save 3 copies left and stored safely away, such works were all destroyed. In India, the last of the precious manuscripts were secured and hidden during the reign of the Emperor Akbar. Professor Max Muller shows that no bribes or threats of Akbar could extort from the Brahmins the original text of the Veda, and boasts that European Orientalists have it. Lecture on the Science of Religion, page 23. Whether Europe has a complete text is very doubtful, and the future may have very disagreeable surprises in store for the Orientalist. The next work after this one I plan on being the Rig Veda unless something interferes. If there is a better way to read them chronologically than the Rig Veda first, let me know in the comments so that I do it in the best manner possible. But from my understanding, the Rig Veda is the root of all of them, so I want to get that in. So if you have a different chronology, let me know down below. It is maintained, furthermore, that every sacred book of that kind, whose text was not sufficiently veiled in symbolism, or which had any direct references to the ancient mysteries, after having been carefully copied in cryptographic characters, such as to defy the art of the best and cleverest paleographer, was also destroyed to the last copy. During Akbar's reign, some financial courtiers, displeased at the emperor's sinful prying into the religions of the infidels, themselves helped the Brahmins to conceal their manuscripts. Such was Baldoni, who had an undisguised horror for Akbar's mania for idolatrous religions. We're going to check out the footnote. Baldoni wrote in his Muntakahab at Tawarik, His Majesty relished inquiries into the sex of these infidels, who cannot be counted, so numerous they are, and who have no end of revealed books, as they, the Sarama and Brahmins, surpass other learned men in their treatises on morals, on physical and religious sciences, and reach a high degree in their knowledge of the future. In spiritual power and human perfection, they brought proofs based on reason and testimony, and inculcated their doctrines so firmly that no man can now raise a doubt in His Majesty, even if mountains were to crumble to dust or the heavens were to tear asunder. This work was kept secret and was not published till the reign of Jahangir. Moreover, back to the text. Moreover, in all the large and wealthy lamaseries there are subterranean crypts and cave libraries cut in the rock, whenever the Gonpa and the Lakang are situated in the mountains. Beyond the western Tsadam, in the solitary passes of Kuen-Lun, let's look at that footnote, the Karakoram Mountains of western Tibet. There are several such hiding places. Along the ridge of Altintoga, whose soil no European foot has ever trodden so far, there exists a certain hamlet, lost in a deep gorge. It is a small cluster of houses, a hamlet rather than a monastery, with a poor-looking temple in it, with one old lama, a hermit, living near to watch it. Pilgrims say that the subterranean galleries and halls under it contain a collection of books, the number of which, according to the accounts given, is too large to find room, even in the British Museum. We'll look at that footnote. According to the same tradition, the now desolate regions of the waterless land of Tarim, the true wilderness in the heart of Turkestan, were in the days of old covered with flourishing and wealthy cities. See the 12,000-year disaster cycle for more on that. At present, hardly a few verdant oases relieve its dead solitude. One such, sprung on the sepulchre of a vast city swallowed by and buried under the sandy soil of the desert, belongs to no one, but is often visited by Mongolians and Buddhists. The same tradition speaks of immense subterranean abodes, of large corridors filled with tiles and cylinders. It may be an idle rumor, and it may be an actual fact. All this is very likely to provoke a smile of doubt, but then, before the reader rejects the truthfulness of the reports, let him pause and reflect over the following well-known facts. The collective researches of the Orientalists, and especially the labors of late years of the students of comparative philology and the science of religions, have led them to ascertain as follows. An immense, incalculable number of manuscripts and even printed works known to have existed are now to be found no more. They have disappeared without leaving the slightest trace behind them. Were they works of no importance, they might, in the natural course of time, have been left to perish, and their very names would have been obliterated from human memory. But it is not so, for, as now ascertained, most of them contain the true keys to works without extant, and entirely incomprehensible for the greater portion of their readers, without these additional volumes of commentaries and explanations. Such are, for instance, the works of Lao Tse, the predecessor of Confucius. Most of those works will probably be found in the Catholic Church. The footnote. If we turn to China, we find that the religion of Confucius is founded on the 5 King and the 4 Shu books, in themselves of considerable extent and surrounded by voluminous commentaries, without which even the most learned scholars would not venture to fathom the depth of their sacred canon. Lectures on the Science of Religion by Max Muller. They have not fathomed it, and this is the complaint of the Confucianist, as a very learned member of that body in Paris complained in 1881. He is said to have written 930 books on ethics and religions, and 70 on magic, 1,000 in all. His greatest work, however, the heart of his doctrine, the Tao Se Ting, or the sacred scriptures of the Taos, has in it, as Stanislaus Julian shows, only about 5,000 words. Tao Te King, hardly a dozen pages, yet Professor Max Muller finds that the text is unintelligible without commentaries, so that Mr. Julian had to consult more than 60 commentators for the purpose of his translation, the earliest going back as far as the year 163 B.C., not earlier as we see. During the 4 centuries and a half that preceded this earliest of the commentators, there was ample time to veil the true Lao Tse doctrine from all but his initiated priests. The Japanese, among whom are now to be found the most learned of the priests and followers of Lao Tse, simply laugh at the blunders and hypotheses of the European Chinese scholars, and tradition affirms that the commentaries to which our Western sinologues have access are not the real occult records, but intentional veils, and that the true commentaries, as well as almost all the text, have long since disappeared from the eyes of the profane. If one turns to the ancient literature of the Semitic religions, to the Chaldean scriptures, the elder sister and instructress, if not the fountainhead of the Mosaic Bible, the basis and starting point of Christianity, what do scholars find? To perpetuate the memory of the ancient religions of Babylon, to record the vast cycle of astronomical observations of the Chaldean Magi, to justify the tradition of their splendid and eminently occult literature. What now remains? Only a few fragments said to be by Berosus. These, however, are almost valueless, even as a clue to the character of what has disappeared, for they pass through the hands of His Reverence the Bishop of Caesarea, that self-constituted censor and editor of the sacred records of other men's religions, and they doubtless bear to this day the mark of his eminently veracious and trustworthy hand. For what is the history of this treatise on the once grand religion of Babylon? Written in Greek by Berosus, a priest of the Temple of Belus, for Alexander the Great, from the astronomical and chronological records preserved by the priest of that temple, and covering a period of 200,000 years, it is now lost. In the 1st century BC, Alexander Polyhistor made a series of extracts from it, also lost. Eusebius used these extracts in writing his Chronicon, 270 to 340 A.D. The points of resemblance, almost of identity, between the Jewish and the Chaldean scriptures. We're going to check out that footnote. Found out and proven only now through the discoveries made by George Smith, vide his Chaldean account of Genesis, and which, thanks to this Armenian forger, have misled all the civilized nations for over 1,500 years into accepting Jewish derivations for direct revelation. Between the Jewish and Chaldean scriptures made the latter most dangerous to Eusebius in his role of defender and champion of the new faith which had adopted the Jewish scriptures, and with them an absurd chronology. It is pretty certain that Eusebius did not spare the Egyptian synchronistic tables of Manetho, so much so that Bunsen charges him with mutilating history most unscrupulously. Well, check out that footnote. That is in Egypt's place of history. And Socrates. We have dealt extensively with Socrates, not entirely, but extensively. That is in the Ancient Lore playlist. And Socrates, a historian of the 5th century, and Syncellus, vice-patriarch of Constantinople, 8th century, both denounce him as the most daring and desperate forger. It is likely, then, that he dealt more tenderly with the Chaldean records which were already menacing the new religion, so rashly accepted. So that, with the exception of these more than doubtful fragments, the entire Chaldean sacred literature has disappeared from the eyes of the profane as completely as the lost Atlantis. A few facts that were contained in the Berosian history are given in Part 2 of Volume 2, and may throw a great light on the true origin of the fallen angels personified by Bel and the dragon. Turning now to the oldest Aryan literature, the Rig Veda. That is why I am doing this. As far as I know, it is the oldest, and I want to investigate that one next. That is going to be the next study after this, unless something intervenes. The student will find, following strictly in this, the data furnished by the said Orientalists themselves, that although the Rig Veda contains only about 10,580 verses, or 1,028 hymns, how is that not an exact number, if that is an exact number, right? About would be 10,600 or 10,500, not 10,580, right? In spite of the Brahmanas and the mass of glosses and commentaries, it is not understood correctly to this day. Why is this so? Evidently because the Brahmas, the scholastic and oldest treatises upon the primitive hymns, themselves require a key, which the Orientalists have failed to secure. I want to know if that key exists. If you are aware of the key, let me know so that I can find the key. It might be mentioned here coming up, but if not, let me know. What do scholars say of Buddhist literature? Have they got it in its completeness? Absolutely not. Notwithstanding the 325 volumes of the Kanjor and the Tanjor of the Northern Buddhists, each volume, we are told, weighing from 4 to 5 pounds. Nothing, in truth, is known of Lamaism. Yet, The sacred canon of the Southern Church is said to contain 29,368,000 letters in the Saddharma Alankara. Let's check out that footnote real quick. Spence Hardy, The Legends and Theories of the Buddhist, and the next footnote is going to be Buddhism in Tibet. We will not come back for that. Or exclusive of treatises and commentaries. Five or six times the amount of the matter contained in the Bible. The latter, in the words of Professor Max Muller, rejoicing only in 3,567,180 letters. Notwithstanding, then, these 325 volumes, in reality there are 333, Kanjor, comprising 108, and Tanjore, 225 volumes. The translators, instead of supplying us with correct versions, have interwoven them with their own commentaries for the purpose of justifying the dogmas of their several schools. Moreover, according to a tradition preserved by the Buddhist schools both of the South and of the North, the sacred Buddhist canon comprised originally 80,000 or 84,000 tracts, but most of them were lost, so that there remained but 6,000. The professor tells his audiences, "Lost is usual for Europeans, but who can be quite sure that they are likewise lost for Buddhists and Brahmins?" Considering the sacredness for the Buddhists of every line written upon Buddha or his good law, the loss of nearly 76,000 tracts does seem miraculous. Had it been vice versa, everyone acquainted with the natural course of events would subscribe to the statement that, of these 76,000, 5,000 or 6,000 treatises might have been destroyed during the persecutions in and immigrations from India. But as it is well ascertained that Buddhist arhats began their religious exodus for the purpose of propagating the new faith beyond Kashmir and the Himalayas, as early as the year 300 before our era. Then the footnote says, Lassen shows a Buddhist monastery erected in the Kailas Range in 137 BC, and General Cunningham earlier than that. And the next footnote will be Reverend Edkin's Chinese Buddhism, and we will not come back for that. And reached China in the year 61 AD. That would be that. We're not going back. When Kashyapa, at the invitation of the Emperor Ming-Ti, went there to acquaint the Son of Heaven with the tenets of Buddhism. It does seem strange to hear the Orientalists speaking of such a loss as though it were really possible. They do not seem to allow for one moment the possibility that the text may be lost only for West and for themselves, or that the Asiatic people should have unparalleled boldness to keep their most sacred records out of the reach of foreigners, thus refusing to deliver them to the profanation and misuse of races so vastly superior to themselves. Owing to the expressed regrets and numerous confessions of almost every one of the Orientalists, see Max Muller's lectures for example, the public may feel sufficiently sure, A, that the students of ancient religions have indeed very few data upon which to build such final conclusions as they generally do about the old religions, and B, that such lack of data does not prevent them in the least from dogmatizing. One would imagine that, thanks to the numerous records of Egyptian theogony and mysteries preserved in the classics, and in a number of ancient writers, the rites and dogmas of Pharaonic Egypt ought to be well understood at least, better at any rate than the abstruse philosophies and pantheism of India, of whose religion and language Europe had hardly any idea before the beginning of the present century. Along the Nile and on the face of the whole country there stand to this hour, exhumed yearly and daily, fresh relics which eloquently tell their own history. Still, it is not so. The learned Oxford philologist confesses the truth by saying that though we see still standing the pyramids and the ruins of temples and labyrinths, their walls covered with hieroglyphic inscriptions and with the strange pictures of gods and goddesses, on rolls of papyrus which seem to defy the ravages of time. We have even fragments of what may be called the sacred books of the Egyptians. Yet, though much has been deciphered in the ancient records of that mysterious race, the mainspring of the religion of Egypt and the original intention of its ceremonial worship are far from being fully disclosed to us. And here's a footnote. So little acquainted are our greatest Egyptologists with the funerary rites of the Egyptians and the outward marks of the difference of sexes made on the mummies, that it has led to the most ludicrous mistakes. Only a year or two since, one of that kind was discovered at Bulaq, Cairo. The mummy of what had been considered the wife of an unimportant pharaoh had turned out, thanks to an inscription found on an amulet hung from its neck, to be that of Sesostris, the greatest king of Egypt. Here, again, the mysterious hieroglyphic documents remain, but the keys by which they alone become intelligible have disappeared. Nevertheless, having found that there is a natural connection between language and religion, and secondly, that there was a common Aryan religion before the separation of the Aryan race, a common Semitic religion before the separation of the Semitic race, and a common Turanian religion before the separation of the Chinese and the other tribes belonging to the Turanian class, having, in fact, only discovered 3 ancient centers of religion and 3 centers of language. And though as entirely ignorant of these primitive religions and languages as of their origin, the professor does not hesitate to declare that a truly historical basis for a scientific treatment of those principal religions of the world has been gained. A scientific treatment of a subject is no guarantee for its historical basis, and with such scarcity of data on hand, no philologist, even among the most eminent, is justified in giving out his own conclusions for historical facts. No doubt, the eminent Orientalist has proved thoroughly, to the world's satisfaction, that according to Grimm's law of phonetic rules, Odin and Buddha are 2 different personages, quite distinct from each other, and he has shown it scientifically. When, however, he takes the opportunity of saying in the same breath that Odin was worshipped as the supreme deity during a period long anterior to the age of the Veda and of Homer, Comparative Theology, page 318, he has not the slightest historical basis for it. He makes history and fact subservient to his own conclusions, which may be very scientific in the sight of Oriental scholars, but yet very wide of the mark of actual truth. The conflicting views on the subject of chronology, in the case of the Vedas, of the various eminent philologists and Orientalists, from Martin Hogg down to Max Muller himself, are an evident proof of the statement that no historical basis to stand upon, internal evidence being very often a jack-o'-lantern instead of a safe beacon to follow. Nor has the science of modern comparative mythology any better proof to show that those learned writers who have insisted for the last century or so that there must have been fragments of a primeval revelation granted to the ancestors of the whole race of mankind, preserved in the temples of Greece and Italy, were entirely wrong. For this is what all the Eastern initiates and pundits have been proclaiming to the world from time to time. While a prominent Sinhalese priest assured the writer that it was well known that the most important Buddhist tracts belonging to the sacred canon were stored away in countries and places inaccessible to the European pundits. The late Swami Dayanand Sarasvati, the greatest Sanskritist of his day in India, assured some members of the Theosophical Society of the same fact with regard to ancient Brahmanical works. When told that Professor Max Muller had declared to the audiences of his lectures that the theory that there was a primeval preternatural revelation granted to the fathers of the human race finds but few supporters at present, the holy and learned men laughed. His answer was suggestive. If Mr. Moksmuller, as he pronounced the name, were a Brahmin and came with me, I might take him to a Gupta cave, a secret crypt, near Okhimath in the Himalayas, where he would soon find out that what crossed the Kalapani, the black waters of the ocean, from India to Europe, were only the bits of rejected copies of some passages from our sacred books. There was a primeval revelation, and it still exists, nor will it ever be lost to the world, but will reappear through the Malakakanas. We'll of course have to wait. Questioned further on this point, he would say no more. This was at Meerut in 1880. No doubt the mystification played in the last century at Calcutta by the Brahmins upon Colonel Wilford and Sir William Jones was a cruel one, but it had been well deserved, and no one was more to be blamed in that affair than the missionaries and Colonel Wilford themselves. The former, on the testimony of Sir William Jones himself, sees Asiatic, Volume 1, were silly enough to maintain that the Hindus were even now almost Christians, because their Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahisa were no other than the Christian Trinity. It was a good lesson. It made the Oriental scholars doubly cautious, but, perchance, it has also made some of them too shy and caused, in its reaction, the pendulum of foregone conclusions to swing too much the other way. For that first supply on the Brahmanical market, made for Colonel Wilford, has now created an evident necessity and desire in the Orientalist to declare nearly every archaic Sanskrit manuscript so modern as to give the missionaries full justification for availing themselves of the opportunity. That they do so, and to the extent of their mental powers, is shown by the absurd attempts of late to prove that the whole Puranic story about Krishna was plagiarized by the Brahmins from the Bible. But the facts, cited by the Oxford professor in his lectures on the science of religion, concerning the now famous interpolations, for the benefit and later on to the sorrow of Colonel Wilford, do not at all interfere with the conclusions to which one who studies the new secret doctrine must unavoidably come. For, if the results show that neither the New nor even the Old Testament borrowed anything from the more ancient religion of the Brahmins and Buddhists, it does not follow that the Jews have not borrowed all they knew from the Chaldean records, the latter being mutilated later on by Eusebius. As to the Chaldeans, they assuredly got their primitive learning from the Brahmins, for Rawlinson shows an undeniably Vedic influence in the early mythology of Babylon, and Colonel Vance Kennedy has long since justly declared that Babylonia was, from her origin, the seat of Sanskrit and Brahmin learning. But all such proofs must lose their value in the presence of the latest theory worked out by Professor Max Muller. What it is, everyone knows. The Code of Phonetic Laws have now become a universal solvent for every identification and connection between the gods of many nations. Thus, though the mother of Mercury, Buddha, Tehote, Hermes, etc., was Maya, the mother of Buddha, Gautama, also Maya, and the mother of Jesus, likewise Maya, illusion, for Mary is Mare, the sea, the great illusion symbolically. Yet these three characters have no connection, nor can they have any, since Bob has laid down his code of phonetic laws. In our efforts to collect together the many skeins of unwritten history, it is a bold step for our Orientalists to take, to deny a priori everything that does not dovetail with their special conclusions. Thus, while new discoveries are daily made of great arts and sciences having existed far back into the night of time, even the knowledge of writing is refused to some of the most ancient nations, and they are credited with barbarism instead of culture. Yet the traces of an immense civilization, even in Central Asia, are still to be found. This civilization is undeniably prehistoric. See the 12,000-year disaster cycle again for more information. And how can there be a civilization without a literature, in some form, without annals or chronicles? Common sense alone ought to supplement the broken links in the history of departed nations, the gigantic, unbroken wall of the mountains that hem in the whole tableland of Tibet. from the upper course of the river Konke down to the Karakorum Hills, witnessed a civilization during millenniums of years, and would have strange secrets to tell mankind. The eastern and central portions of those regions, the Nanshan and the Altin Tainga, were once upon a time covered with cities that could well vie with Babylon. A whole geological period has swept over the land since those cities breathed their last, as the mounds of shifting sand and the sterile and now dead soil of the immense central plains of the basin of Tarim testify. The borderlands alone are superficially known to the traveler. Within those tablelands of sand there is water, and fresh oases are found blooming there, wherein no European foot has ever ventured or trodden the now treacherous soil. Among these verdant oases there are some which are entirely inaccessible even to the native profane traveler. Hurricanes may tear up the sands and sweep whole plains away. They are powerless to destroy that which is beyond their reach. Built deep in the bowels of the earth, the subterranean stores are secure, and as their entrances are concealed in such oases, there is little fear that anyone should discover them, even should several armies invade the sandy waste, where not a pool, not a bush, not a house is seen, and the mountain range forms a ragged screen around the parched flats of the dry desert. But there is no need to send the reader across the desert when the same proofs of ancient civilization are found even in comparatively populated regions of the same country. The oasis of Tehekartin, for instance, situated about 4,000 feet above the level of the river Techerkatin de Arta, is surrounded with the ruins of archaic towns and cities in every direction. There, some 3,000 human beings represent the relics of about 100 extinct nations and races, the very names of which are now unknown to our ethnologists. An anthropologist would feel more than embarrassed to class, divide, and subdivide them, the more so as the respective descendants of all these antediluvian races and tribes know as little of their own forefathers themselves, as if they had fallen from the moon. When questioned about their origin, they replied that they know not whence their fathers had come, but had heard that their first, or earliest, men were ruled by the great genie of these deserts. See the 12,000-year disaster cycle. This may be put down to ignorance and superstition, yet in view of the teachings of the secret doctrine, the answer may be based upon primeval tradition. Alone, the tribes of Khorasan claim to have come from what is now known as Afghanistan, long before the days of Alexander, and brings legendary lore to that effect as corroboration. The Russian traveler, Colonel, now General, Przhevalsky, found quite close to the oasis of Techertin the ruins of two enormous cities, the oldest of which was, according to local tradition, ruined 3,000 years ago by a hero and giant, and the others by the Mongolians in the 10th century of our era. The emplacement of the two cities is now covered, owing to shifting sands and the desert wind, with strange and heterogeneous relics, with broken china and kitchen utensils and human bones. The natives often find copper and gold coins, melted silver, ingots, diamonds, and turquoises, and what is the most remarkable, broken glass. Coffins of some undecaying wood or material also within the beautifully preserved embalmed bodies are found. The male mummies are all extremely tall, powerfully built men with long waving hair. A vault was found with 12 dead men sitting in it. Another time, in a separate coffin, a young girl was discovered by us. Her eyes were closed with golden discs, and the head jaws held firm by a golden circlet running under the chin across the top of the head. Clad in a narrow woolen garment, her bosom was covered with golden stars, the feet being left naked. From a lecture by N.M. Przhevalsky. To this, the famous traveler adds that all along their way down the river to Cherton, they heard legends about 23 towns buried ages ago by shifting sands of the desert. The same tradition exists in the Lab Nor and in the oasis of Keria. The traces of such civilization and these and like traditions give us the right to credit other legendary lore warranted by well-educated and learned natives of India and Mongolia. When they speak of immense libraries reclaimed from the sand, together with various relics of ancient magic lore, which have all been safely stowed away. To recapitulate, the secret doctrine was the universally diffused religion of the ancient and prehistoric world. Proofs of its diffusion, authentic records of its history, a complete chain of documents showing its character and presence in every land, together with the teaching of all of its great adepts, exist to this day in the secret crypts of libraries belonging to the occult fraternity. This statement is rendered more credible by a consideration of the following facts. The tradition of the thousands of ancient parchments saved when the Alexandrian library was destroyed. The thousands of Sanskrit works which disappeared in India in the reign of Akbar. The universal tradition in China and Japan that the true old texts with the commentaries, which alone make them incomprehensible, amounting to many thousands of volumes, have long passed out of the reach of profane hands. The disappearance of the vast, sacred, and occult literature of Babylon, the loss of those keys which alone could solve the thousand riddles of the Egyptian hieroglyphic records, the tradition in India that the real secret commentaries which alone make the Veda intelligible, though no longer visible to profane eyes, still remain for the initiate hidden in secret caves and crypts, and an identical belief among the Buddhists with regard to their secret books. The occultists assert that all these exist, save from Western spoliating hands, to reappear in some more enlightened age, for which, in the words of the late Swami Dayanand Sarasvati, the Malakikas, outcast savages, those beyond the pale of Aryan civilization, will have to wait. For it is not the fault of the initiates that these documents are now lost to the profane, nor was their policy dictated by selfishness or any desire to monopolize the life-giving sacred lore. There were portions of the secret science that, for incalculable ages, had to remain concealed from the profane gaze. But this was because to impart to the unprepared multitude secrets of such tremendous importance was equivalent to giving a child a lighted candle in a powder magazine. That is one of the reasons why this is so hard to get through, right? I'm reading these things. We discuss them as we go along. There has not been a lot in here, but I'm hoping there will be more going forward. But you have to slog through it. You have to actually be dedicated to attaining the knowledge in order to get the knowledge, right? That is a filter. I could just blurt it out. I'm writing a book where I literally do that. But for the most part, you have to slog through. You have to pay attention to the not important parts to get to the important parts. That is me, in part. While I am freely dispensing the information, it is not as freely available to the ones who are not ready, right? If you're not ready to learn these things, you are not an hour and a half into my video. The answer to a question which has frequently arisen in the minds of students when meeting with statements such as these may be outlined here. We can understand, they say, the necessity for concealing from the head such secrets as the Varil or the rock-destroying force discovered by J.W. Keeley of Philadelphia, but we cannot understand how any danger could arise from the revelation of such a purely philosophic doctrine as, e.g., the evolution of the planetary chains. The danger was this. Doctrines, such as the planetary chain or the seven races, at once give a clue to the sevenfold nature of man. For each principle is correlated to a plane, a planet, and a race, and the human principles are, on every plane, correlated to sevenfold occult forces, those of higher planes being of tremendous power. All right, we're going to stop. I am unfamiliar with this doctrine. Right? I don't know what they mean by planetary chain. I have a small understanding of what the 7 races might be. I have my own theory about the harmonics of life, how everything is an 8-step process, but 8 is often 7 with the 1 being the encompassing, right? So there is God, and then there are 7 races, and that makes 8 steps. That can be a little convoluted for some people. If that is too much for you, I understand, but the fundamental harmonics of existence will get you there. There is an 8-step process for pretty much everything, as far as I can determine. Some of them are governed by the number 7, but they do include the deity, right? You have 7 internal chakras and 1 external one. There are 8 different types of gemstone, right? The semi-precious and precious gemstones. There are 8 different ways to classify those. There are 8 notes in the musical scale, including the beginning of the new harmonic. All of these things are important. The number 1, 3, 8 is the number that I look for, but most often 7 is indicating 8 with God, right? Again, that can be too convoluted for some people, but for me it is a harmonic. The harmonic goes from C to C. It doesn't stop at B, right? It goes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. The C is the beginning of the new harmonic. It is the exact doubling of the note C to begin with, or the exact halving, depending on which direction you're going. But it is 8 steps, not 7. So when we see 7, wherever it may appear, I always look for the 8, right? And here, there are 7 men, 7 different types of men, with God, the 1, being the external, to complete the harmonic. So that any septenary division at once gives a clue to tremendous occult powers, the abuse of which would cause incalculable evil to humanity. A clue which is perhaps no clue to the present generation, especially the Westerns, protected as they are by their very blindness and ignorant materialistic disbelief in the occult. But a clue which would, nonetheless, have been very real in the early centuries of the Christian era to people fully convinced of the reality of occultism and entering a cycle of degradation, which made them rife for abuse of occult powers and sorcery of the worst description. The documents were concealed, it is true, but the knowledge itself and its actual existence have never been made a secret by the hierophants of the temple, wherein mysteries have ever been made a discipline and stimulus to virtue. This is very old news and was repeatedly made known by the greatest adepts, from Pythagoras and Plato down to the Neoplatonists. It was the new religion of the Nazarenes that wrought a change for the worse in the policy of centuries. Check out the Bible study. Moreover, there is a well-known fact, a very curious one, corroborated by the writer, by a reverend gentleman attached for years to the Russian embassy, namely, that there are several documents in the St. Petersburg Imperial Libraries to show that, even so late as during the days when Freemasonry, the secret society of the mystics, flourished unimpeded in Russia, an example, at the end of the last and beginning of the present century, more than one Russian mystic traveled to Tibet via the Ural Mountains in search of knowledge and initiation in the unknown crypts of Central Asia. And more than one returned years later with a rich store of such information as could never have been given him anywhere but in Europe, or given him anywhere in Europe. Several cases could be cited and well-known names brought forward, but for the fact that such publicity might annoy the surviving relatives of the said late initiates, let anyone look over the annals and history of Freemasonry in the archives of the Russian metropolis, and he will assure himself of the fact stated. We have dealt with Freemasonry in large part. This is a corroboration of that which has been stated many times before, and, unfortunately, too indiscreetly. Instead of benefiting humanity, the virulent charges of deliberate invention and imposture with a purpose thrown at those who asserted but a truthful, if even a little known fact, have only generated bad karma for the slanderers. But now the mischief is done, and truth should no longer be denied, whatever the consequences. Is it a new religion, we are asked? By no means. It is not a religion, nor is its philosophy new. For, as already stated, it is as old as thinking man. Its tenets are not now published for the first time, but have been cautiously given out to and taught by more than one European initiate, especially in the late Regon. More than one great scholar has stated that there was never a religious founder, whether Aryan, Semitic, or Turanian, who had invented a new religion or revealed a new truth. These founders were all transmitters, not original teachers. They were the authors of new forms and interpretations, while the truths upon which the latter were based were as old as mankind. Selecting one or more of these grand verities, actualities visible only to the eyes of the real seer and sage, out of the many orally revealed to a man in the beginning, preserved and perpetuated in the Advaita of the temples through initiation, during the mysteries and by personal transmission, they revealed these truths to the masses. Thus, every nation received in its turn some of the said truths under the veil of its own local and special symbolism, which, as time went on, developed a more or less philosophical cultus, a pantheon in mythical disguise. Therefore, it is Confucius, a very ancient legislator in historical chronology, though a very modern sage in the world's history, shown by Dr. Legay. Let's go ahead and pull up that footnote. Lun Shu, Chinese literature. Next will be Life of Confucius. Who calls on him emphatically, a transmitter, not a maker, as saying, I only hand on, I cannot create new things. I believe in the ancients, and therefore I love them. Quoted in Science of Religions by Max Muller. The writer loves them too, and therefore believes in the ancients and the modern heirs to their wisdom. And believing in both, she now transmits that which she has received and learnt herself to all who will accept it. That is, me too. As to those who may reject her testimony, an example, the great majority, yes, she will bear them no malice, for they will be as right in their way of denying as she is right in hers in affirming, since they look at truth from two entirely different standpoints. Agreeably with the rules of critical scholarship, the Orientalist has to reject, a priori, whatever evidence he cannot fully verify for himself. And how can a Western scholar accept on hearsay that which he knows nothing about? Indeed, that which is given in these volumes is selected from oral as much as from written teachings. This first installment of the Esoteric Doctrine is based upon stanzas, which are the records of a people unknown to ethnology. It is claimed that they are written in a tongue absent from the nomenclature of languages and dialects with which philology is acquainted. They are said to emanate from a source, occultism, repudiated by science. And finally, they are offered through an agency incessantly discredited before the world by all those who hate unwelcome truth, or have some special hobby of their own to defend. Therefore, the rejection of these teachings may be expected, and must be accepted beforehand. No one styling himself a scholar in whatever department of exact science will be permitted to regard these teachings seriously. They will be derided and rejected a priori in this century, but only in this one. No, in the next two for sure. For in the 20th century of our era, scholars will begin to recognize that the secret doctrine has neither been invented nor exaggerated, but on the contrary, simply outlined. That did not happen. That is in part what I am attempting to do, right, through the sorting through of the true and the not. But for sure, the last 100 years, it did not happen. And finally, that its teachings antedate the Vedas have not the latter way. We'll go ahead and check the footnote. This is no pretension to prophecy, but simply a statement based on the knowledge of facts. Every century, an attempt is being made to show the world that occultism, footnote on the next page, is no vain superstition, Once the door permitted to be kept a little ajar, it will be opened wider with every new century. The times are ripe for a more serious knowledge than hitherto permitted, though still very limited so far. Okay. Have not the latter been derided, rejected, and called a modern forgery, even so recently as 50 years ago? Was not Sanskrit proclaimed at one time the progeny of and a dialect derived from the Greek, according to Lempriere and other scholars? About 1820, Professor Max Muller tells us the sacred books of the Brahmins, of the Magians, and of the Buddhists were all but unknown, for their existence was doubted, and there was not a single scholar who could have translated a line of the Veda, or of the Zen Avesta, or of the Buddhist Tripitaka. And now the Vedas are proved to be the work of the highest antiquity, whose preservation amounts to almost a marvel. Lecture on the Vedas. The same will be said of the secret, archaic doctrine, when proofs are given of its undeniable existence and records. It will take centuries before more is given from it. Speaking of the keys to the zodiacal mysteries as being almost lost to the world, it was remarked by the writer in Isis Unveiled some 10 years ago that the said key must be turned 7 times before the whole system is divulged. I would say 8. We will give it but 1 turn, and thereby allow the profane 1 glimpse into the mystery. Happy he who understands the whole. The same may be said of the whole esoteric system. 1 turn of the key and no more was given in Isis. Much more is explained in these volumes. I hope so. That is the goal. In those days, the writer hardly knew the language in which the work was written, and the disclosure of many things, freely spoken about now, was forbidden. In century the 20th, some disciple more informed and far better fitted may be sent by the masters of wisdom to give final and irrefutable proofs that there exists a science called Gupta Vidya, and that, like the once mysterious sources of the Nile, the source of all religions and philosophies now known to the world has been for many ages forgotten and lost to men, but is at last found. We're in the 21st century, and hopefully I'll be able to do that. Such a work as this has to be introduced with no simple preface, but with a volume, rather, one that would give facts, not mere disquisitions, since the secret doctrine is not a treatise or a series of vague theories, but contains all that can be given out into the world in this century. It would be worse than useless to publish in these pages even those portions of the esoteric teachings that have now escaped from confinement, unless the genuineness and authenticity, at any rate, the probability of the existence of such teachings was first established. Such statements will now be made, have to be shown warranted by various authorities. Those of ancient philosophers, classics, and even learned church fathers, some of whom knew these doctrines because they had studied them, had seen and read works written upon them, and some of whom have even been personally initiated into the ancient mysteries, during the performance of which the arcane doctrines were allegorically enacted. The writer will have to give a historical and trustworthy names, and to cite well-known authors, ancient and modern, of recognized ability, good judgment, and truthfulness, and also to name some of the famous proficients in the secret arts and science, along with the mysteries of the latter, as they are divulged, or rather, partially presented before the public in their strange, archaic form. How is this to be done? What is the best way for achieving such an object? Was the ever-recurring question. To make our plan clearer, an illustration may be attempted. When a tourist, coming from a well-explored country, suddenly reaches the borderland of a terra incognita, hedged in and shut out from view by a formidable barrier of impossible rocks, he may still refuse to acknowledge himself baffled in his exploratory plans. Ingress beyond is forbidden. But if he cannot visit the mysterious region personally, he may still find a means of examining it from as short a distance as can be arrived at. helped by his knowledge of landscapes left behind him, he can get a general and pretty correct idea of the transmural view, if he will only climb to the loftiest summit of the altitudes in front of him. Once there, he can gaze at it at his leisure, comparing that which he dimly perceives with that which he has just left below, now that he is, thanks to his efforts, beyond the line of the mists and the cloud-capped cliffs. Such a point of preliminary observation, for those who would like to get a more correct understanding of the mysteries of the pre-archaic periods given in the text, cannot be offered to them in these 2 volumes. But if the reader has patience and would glance at the present state of beliefs and creeds in Europe, compare and check it with what is known to history of the ages directly preceding and following the Christian era, then he will find all this in Volume 3 of this work. In that volume, a brief recapitulation will be made of all the principal adepts known to history, and the downfall of the mysteries will be described, after which began the disappearance and final systemic elimination from the memory of men, the real nature of initiation and the sacred science. From that time, its teachings became occult, and magic sailed, but too often under the venerable but frequently misleading name of Hermetic philosophy. As real occultism has been prevalent among the mystics during the centuries that preceded our era, so magic, or rather sorcery, with its occult arts, followed the beginning of Christianity. However great and zealous the fanatical efforts during those early centuries to obliterate every trace of the mental and intellectual labor of the pagans, it was a failure. But the same spirit of the dark demon of bigotry and intolerance was perverted systematically in ever since every bright page written in the pre-Christian periods. Even in her uncertain records, history has preserved enough of that which has survived to throw an impartial light upon the whole. Let, then, the reader tarry a little while with the writer on the spot of observation selected. He is asked to give all his attention to the millennium which divided the pre-Christian and the post-Christian periods by the year 1 of the Nativity. This event, whether historically correct or not, has nevertheless been made to serve as a first signal for the erection of manifold bulwarks against any possible return of, or even a glimpse into, the hated religions of the past, hated and dreaded, because throwing such a vivid light on the new and intentionally veiled interpretation of what is now known as the New Dispensation. There is a lot to unpack there, and we have done so in other places. However superhuman the efforts of the early Christian fathers to obliterate the secret doctrine from the very memory of man, they all failed. Truth can never be killed, hence the failure to sweep away entirely from the face of the earth every vestige of the ancient wisdom, and to shackle and gag every witness who testified to it. Let one only think of the thousands, and perhaps millions, of manuscripts burnt, of monuments, with their too indiscreet inscriptions and pictorial symbols, pulverized to dust, of the bands of lowly hermits and ascetics roaming about the ruined cities of Upper and Lower Egypt, in desert and mountain, valleys and highlands, seeking for and eager to destroy every obelisk and pillar, scroll or parchment they could lay their hands on, if it only bore the symbol of the Tao, or any other sign borrowed and appropriated by the new faith. And he will then see plainly how it is that so little has remained of the records of the past. Verily, the fiendish spirits of fanaticism, of early and medieval Christianity and of Islam, have from the first loved to dwell in darkness and ignorance, and both have made the sun like blood, the earth like a tomb a hell, and hell itself a murkier gloom. Both creeds have won their proselytes at the point of the sword, have built their churches on heaven-kissing hecatombs of human victims. Over the gateway of the century 1 of our era, the ominous words, "The Karma of Israel," fatally glowed. Over the portals of our own, the future seer may discern other words that will point to the karma for cunningly made-up history, for events purposely perverted, and for great characters slandered by posterity, mangled out of recognition, between the two cars of Jagannatha, bigotry and materialism. One accepting too much, the other denying all. Wise is he who holds to the golden midpoint, balance, who believes in the eternal justice of things, says Faigi Daiwan, the witness to the wonderful speeches of a free thinker who belongs to 1,000 sects. In the assembly of the day of the resurrection, when past things shall be forgiven, the sins of the Kaaba will be forgiven for the sake of the dust of the Christian churches. To this, Professor Max Muller replies, "The sins of both Islam are as worthless as the dust of Christianity. On the day of the resurrection, both Mohammedans and Christians will see the vanity of their religious doctrines. Men fight about religion on earth. In heaven they shall find out that there is only one true religion, the worship of God's Spirit." In other words, the footnote, Lectures on Science and Religion. In other words, there is no religion or law higher than truth. Satyat Nasti Paro Dharma, the motto of the Maharaja of Benares, adapted by the Theosophical Society. As my banner on my channel says, the truth shall set you free. As already said in the preface, the Secret Doctrine is not a version of Isis Unveiled as originally intended. It is a volume, explanatory of it rather, and, though entirely independent of the earlier work, an indispensable corollary to it.
Much of what is in Isis could hardly be understood by theosophists in these days. The Secret Doctrine will now throw light on many a problem left unsolved in the first work,
especially on the opening pages, which have never been understood. Concerned simply with the philosophies within our historical times and the respective symbolism of the fallen nations, only a hurried glance could be thrown at the panorama of occultism in the 2 volumes of Isis. In the present work, detailed cosmogony and the evolution of the 4 races that preceded our 5th race, humanity, are given. And now, the 2 large volumes explain that which was stated on the first page of Isis Unveiled alone, and in a few allusions scattered hither and thither throughout that work. Nor could the vast catalogue of the archaic sciences be attempted in the present volumes, before we have disposed of such tremendous problems as cosmic and planetary evolution, and the gradual development of the mysterious humanities and races that preceded our Adamic humanity. Therefore, the present attempt to elucidate some mysteries of esoteric philosophy has, in truth, nothing to do with the earlier work. As an instance, the writer must be allowed to illustrate what is said. Volume 1 of Isis begins with a reference to an old book. So very old that our modern antiquarians might ponder over its pages an indefinite time, and still not quite agree as to the nature of the fabric upon which it is written. It is the only original copy now in existence, the most ancient Hebrew document on occult learning. The Sifra de Zenutia was compiled from it, and that at a time when the former was already considered in the light of a literary relic. One of its illustrations represent the divine essence emanating from Adam. We're going to go ahead and pull that footnote. The name is used in the sense of the Greek word anthropos, or men, like a luminous arc proceeding to form a circle, and then, having attained the highest point of its circumference, the ineffable glory bends back again, and returns to earth, bringing a higher type of humanity in its vortex. As it approaches nearer and nearer to our planet, the emanation becomes more and more shadowy, until, upon touching the ground, it is as black as night. The very old book, in the original work, from which the many volumes of Quiti were compiled. Not only this latter and the Sefer de Zenuta, but even the Sefer Zazira. We're going to go ahead and pull that footnote. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Kananiah, who died about AD 72, openly declared that he had performed miracles by the means of the book of Sefer Jezerah, and challenged every skeptic. Franck, quoting from the Babylonian Talmud, names two other thaumaturgists, Rabbis Chanina and Oshoi. See Jerusalem Talmud, Sanhedrin. Many of the medieval occultists, alchemists, and Kabbalists claim the same, and even the late modern magus, Eliphas Levi, publicly asserts it in print in his books on magic. And it also, me, I purport that I have done magic. Back to the text. The work attributed by the Hebrew Kabbalists to their patriarch Abraham, the Book of Shuk-King, China's primitive Bible, the sacred volumes of the Egyptian Tehote Hermes, the Puranas of India, and the Chaldean Book of Numbers, and the Pentateuch itself, are all derived from that one small parent volume. Tradition says that it was taken down in Sinzar, the secret sacerdotal tongue, from the words of the divine beings who dictated it to the sons of light in Central Asia, at the very beginning of the fifth our race. We're in 5D space. If you're unaware and you're calling it 3D space, you're incorrect, but I don't go about changing that for people. We live in 5D space, the fifth iteration. For there was a time when its language, the Sinzar, was known to the initiates of every nation, when the forefathers of the Toltec understood it as easily as the inhabitants of the lost Atlantis, who inherited it in their turn from the sages of the third race, the Manushis, who learned it direct from the devas of the second and first races. The illustration spoken of in Isis relates to the evolution of these races and of our fourth and fifth race, humanity, in the Vaivasvata Manvantara, or round, each round being composed of the yugas of the 7 periods of humanity, 4 of which are now past in our life cycle, the middle point of the 5th being very nearly reached. The illustration is symbolical, as everyone can well understand, and covers the ground from the beginning. The old book, having described cosmic evolution and explained the origin of everything on Earth, including physical man, after giving the true history of the races from the first down to the 5th, our race, goes no further. It stops short at the beginning of the Kali Yuga, just 4,989 years ago, at the death of Krishna, the bright sun god, the once living hero and reformer. But there exists another book, none of its possessors regarded as very ancient, as it was born with and is only as old as the Black Age, namely about 5,000 years. In about 9 years hence, the first cycle of the first 5 millenniums that began with the great cycle of the Kali Yuga will end, and then the last prophecy contained in that book, the first volume of the prophetic record for the Black Age, will be accomplished. I would be very interested to know. We will not have long to wait, and many of us will witness the dawn of the new cycle, at the end of which not a few accounts will be settled and squared between the races. Volume 2 of the prophecies is nearly ready, having been in preparation since the time of Buddha's grand successor, Sankaracharya. One more important point must be noticed, one that stands foremost in the series of proofs given of the existence of one primeval universal wisdom, at any rate for the Christian Kabbalist and students. The teachings were, at least, partially known to several of the fathers of the Church. It is maintained, on purely historical grounds, that Origen, Synesius, and even Clemens Alexandrinus had been themselves initiated into the mysteries before adding to the Neoplatonism of the Alexandrian school, that of the Gnostics, under the Christian veil. More than this, some of the doctrines of the secret schools, though by no means all, were preserved in the Vatican, and have since become part and parcel of the mysteries, in the shape of disfigured additions made to the original Christian program by the Latin Church, such as the now materialized dogma of the Immaculate Conception. This accounts for the great persecution set on foot by the Roman Catholic Church against occultism, masonry, and heterodox mysticism generally. The days of Constantine were the last turning point in history, the period of the supreme struggle that ended in the Western world, throttling the old religions in favor of the new one, built on their bodies. From thence the vista into the far distant past, beyond the deluge and the Garden of Eden, began to be forcibly and relentlessly closed by every fair and unfair means against the indiscreet gaze of posterity. Every issue was blocked up, every record that hands could be laid upon, destroyed. Yet there remains enough, even among such mutilated records, to warn us in saying that there is in them every possible evidence of the actual existence of apparent doctrine. Fragments have survived geological and political cataclysms to tell the story, and every survival shows evidence that the now secret wisdom was once the one fountainhead, the ever-flowing perennial source, at which were fed all its streamlets, the later religions of all nations, from the first down to the last. This period, beginning with Buddha and Pythagoras at the one end, and the Neoplatonists and Gnostics at the other, is the only focus left in history wherein converge, for the last time, the bright rays of light streaming from the eons of time gone by, unobscured by the hands of bigotry and fanaticism. This accounts for the necessity under which the writer has labored to be ever explaining the facts given from the horriest past by evidence gathered from the historical period. No other means was at hand, and the risk even of being once more charged with the lack of method and system. The public must be made acquainted with the efforts of many world adepts, of initiated poets, writers, and classics of every age, to preserve in the records of humanity the knowledge of the existence, at least, of such a philosophy, if not actually of its tenets. The initiates of 1888 would indeed remain incomprehensible and never a seemingly impossible myth, were not like initiates shown to have lived in every other age of history. This could be done only by naming chapter and verse where may be found mention of these great characters, who were preceded and followed by a long and interminable line of other famous antediluvian and post-diluvian masters in the arts. Thus, only could be shown on semi-traditional and semi-historical authority, the knowledge of the occult and the power it confers on man are not altogether fictions, and that they are as old as the world itself. To my judges, past and future, therefore, whether they are serious literary critics or those howling dervishes in literature who judge a book according to the popularity or unpopularity of the author's name, who, hardly glancing at its contents, fasten like lethal bacilli on the weakest points of the body, I have nothing to say, nor shall I condescend to notice those crack-brained slanderers, fortunately very few in number, who, hoping to attract public attention by throwing discredit on every writer whose name is better known than their own, foam and bark at their very shadows. These, having first maintained for years that the doctrines taught in the Theosophist and which culminated in esoteric Buddhism, have all been invented by the present writer, have finally turned around and denounced Isis unveiled, and the rest as plagiarism from Eliphas Levi, Paracelsus, and Mirabel Dictu, Buddhism and Brahmanism. As well charge Renan with having stolen his Vie de Jesus from the Gospels, and Max Muller his Sacred Books of the East, or his Chips, from the philosophies of the Brahmins and Gautama, the Buddha. But to the public in general, and the readers of the Secret Doctrine, I may repeat what I have stated all along, and which I now clothe in the words of Montaigne. Gentlemen, I have here made only a nosegay of cold flowers, and have brought nothing of my own but the string that ties them. Pull the string to pieces and cut it up to shreds, if you will. As for the nosegay of facts, you will never be able to make away with these. You can only ignore them, and no more. We may close with a parting word concerning this Volume 1, in an introduction, prefacing a part dealing chiefly with cosmogony, Certain subjects brought forward might be deemed out of place, but one more consideration added to those already given have led me to touch upon them. Every reader will inevitably judge the statements made from the standpoint of his own knowledge, experience, and consciousness based on what he has already learned. The fact the writer is constantly obliged to bear in mind, hence, also, the frequent references to this first book to which matters which, properly speaking, belong to a later part of the work, but which could not be passed by in silence, lest the reader should look down in his work as a fairy tale indeed, a fiction of some modern brain. Thus, the past will help to realize the present, and the latter to better appreciate the past. The errors of the day must be explained and swept away, yet it is more than probable, and in the present case it amounts to certitude, that once more the testimony of long ages and of history will fail to impress anyone but the very intuitional, which is equally to saying the very few. But in this, as in all like cases, the true and the faithful may console themselves by presenting the skeptical modern Sadducee with a mathematical proof and memorial of his obdurate obstinacy and bigotry. There still exists somewhere in the archives of the French Academy the famous law of probabilities, worked out by an algebraical process for the benefit of skeptics by certain mathematicians. It runs thus: if two persons give their evidence to a fact, and thus imparted to each of them 5/6 of certitude, the fact will then have 35/36 of certitude. An example: its probability will bear to its improbability the ratio of 35 to 1. If three such evidences are joined together, the certitude will become 215 out of 216. The agreement of 10 personages giving 1/2 of certitude will produce 1023 of 1024, etc., etc. The occultist may remain satisfied and care for no more. And that is going to bring us to the end of the preface and the introduction. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to some beginning to be difficult subjects. I hope to delve much deeper into this. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is something I do not apologize for. If Helena Blavatsky was here, we could discuss this in a civilized manner, and we could come to the truth of the matter. However, she has been dead for well over 100 years, and so that is an impossibility. And so I can only hold discourse with the ideas as they are presented in the book. There will undoubtedly be some scientific terminology that is outdated. There will be references to people that is probably outdated. There will be things that are outdated, and I'm here to bring clarity to things. Right? We will discuss where the science is wrong. We will discuss where the terminology is wrong, and we will discuss where the magic is wrong. That is the hope and the goal of what we are doing in its entirety on this channel. This channel deals with overcoming, right? We deal with depression and anxiety and addiction in the reaction videos and other places. We deal with magic and certitude in these studies. I fully intend to fully disclose every scrap of information that I have. These works help to bring that into possibility, right? Into actuality. As they are brought to light by the text, we will discuss them in some great measure. Some of these studies are going to be exceptionally long. Now that my voice can hold up for 3 hours, we'll go for 3 hours. We will do exactly how long my voice will allow. That's going to restrict a lot of the other things that I'm able to do. For me to make a 3-hour video, this one is probably going to be pretty close to. I'm not sure. I had to break it up, so I'm not sure how much exactly it's going to be. But the longer it is, the longer it takes to edit. And I don't do much editing. It is merely splicing it together and putting it into the format to go on the video platforms for the most part. I don't cut things out, right? The cuts are so that I can go get more tea and then I can go to the bathroom and things like that. We don't cut out parts. Even if I am wrong, I am willing to be corrected in anything. You have to be logically consistent. It cannot just be, well, did you read the Bible, right? Yes, I have, publicly. That is why I don't follow it. I am attempting to show as clearly as possible that magic is real. Now, it is not what you think of as magic. There is no say a magic word and you get this thing of your desire. That is not how it works. It is not even draw these sickles upon the ground and call forth some demon. In my experience, that is not how it works. I have had effectiveness through direct manipulation of the electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the Holy Spirit. And as a wrap-up, we're going to talk about the Trinity because it was mentioned but not nearly well enough, and I want that in this video too. The Trinity, as I view it, is this. You have the body. That is the temple of God, which you are given to navigate 5D space. You have the soul, which is the individualized piece of God that makes the decisions for the temple. And then you have the Holy Spirit, which is all of everything. It is every single atom in existence and all of the space between the atoms. It is literally the electromagnetic harmonic that holds us in place. And you can take a small measure of control of the Holy Spirit through God and affect change at least in your own life, but in some instances externally, with caveats that hopefully get further elucidated as we go through this. But we have already talked about in some small measure in the Infinite Integrations playlist. And that's where we're going to leave it. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that I have said or anything that she has said, drop it in the comments down below. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work that you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because the bills don't pay themselves.
To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take.
Peace.